For decades, Iran held the world's oil hostage with a single threat: close the Strait of Hormuz. But Tehran forgot about one country. A nation of 4.5 million sitting on cliffs directly above the shipping lanes, where 73% of all tanker traffic already passes through their waters. Oman didn't just survive the Hormuz trap, they broke it. And the story begins with a peninsula most people have never heard of. Sheer limestone cliffs, some rising 500 meters straight from the sea, form the backbone of Oman's Musandam Peninsula. This is not just dramatic scenery. These heights command the southern half of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most congested maritime corridors. Every supertanker, container ship, and naval escort threading through the strait's southern lane does so under the silent gaze of Musandam's watchtowers, both natural and man-made. The geography here does not offer options. The strait narrows to about 30 nautical miles, but the deep water channel capable of handling vessels drawing 15 to 20 meters in draft hugs the Omani coast. The International Maritime Organization's official lane, marked on every admiralty chart, runs just 8 nautical miles off these cliffs, well inside Oman's territorial sea. Tankers over 300 gross tons must take on an Omani pilot before entering the Musandam approaches. The Musandam Port Authority enforces this with a compulsory pilotage regime, backed by the Royal Navy of Oman and a network of radar posts perched high above the water. Satellite mosaics and AIS data confirm the reality. Nearly 3/4 of all ships passing through Hormuz keep entirely within Omani waters for the critical southern half of the transit. The rest cross briefly into the Iranian side, but only when overtaking or forced by weather. The minimum depth in this lane is 120 meters, enough for the largest oil carriers on Earth. The cliffs themselves, ranging from 300 to 500 meters, offer clear sightlines for visual and electronic surveillance across the entire southern corridor. Every vessel that passes here does so under Omani authority, whether they acknowledge it or not. Geography has handed Musandam the quiet power to observe, direct, and, if needed, halt the flow of ships that keep the global economy running. The world's focus may linger on Tehran's threats, but the real choke point sits beneath Omani cliffs, where the rules of passage are enforced not by rhetoric, but by rock and water. For decades, Oman has been the Gulf's quiet go-between, a country almost invisible to headlines, yet indispensable when rivals reach a deadlock. This tradition began under Sultan Qaboos, whose reign from 1970 to 2020 was defined by a policy of strict neutrality and discreet mediation. While neighbors traded threats, Qaboos opened Muscat's doors to adversaries who refused to meet anywhere else. The clearest proof came during the nuclear standoff of the last decade. Between 2013 and 2015, as the world's attention fixed on Vienna and Geneva, the real breakthroughs happened in Muscat. Declassified diplomatic cables confirmed that senior Iranian and American officials met repeatedly in Oman's capital, far from cameras and the press. On May 22, 2013, the so-called Muscat track began with a secret meeting between Iran's deputy foreign minister and a senior U.S. advisor. Over the next 2 years, Oman's foreign minister Yusuf bin Alawi shuttled proposals and draft language between the two sides, culminating in the final terms of the JCPOA. The Iranians trusted Qaboos's word, and the Americans trusted his silence. When the agreement was signed in 2015, Omani diplomats were publicly thanked for providing the only neutral ground both sides could accept. That legacy did not end with Qaboos's death. His successor, Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, inherited not only the throne but the credibility to act as a trusted intermediary. Haytham pledged in his first major policy address in January 2020 that Oman would remain a bridge of understanding in the region. When the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis erupted, it was Muscat, not Doha, not Riyadh, that both Washington and Tehran called first. Omani diplomats, already seasoned by years of back-channel work, resumed their quiet shuttle between capitals. The continuity is striking. The same officials who brokered the 2015 nuclear deal now manage the only open line between the White House and the Iranian leadership. What looks like passivity is, in fact, a posture of leverage. Oman's neutrality is not a weakness, but the very reason its capital becomes the last trusted table when all others are overturned. Duqm sits more than 300 kilometers south of the Strait of Hormuz, carved into the Omani coast and facing the open Arabian Sea. On paper, it is a remote outpost. In reality, it is a purpose-built bypass designed to let the world's largest oil tankers and container ships avoid the narrow, contested waters where Iran's threats have always carried weight. The port's main channel now runs 16 meters deep, the result of a $550 million expansion finished in 2025. That is enough draft for fully loaded VLCC vessels and even the rare ULCC vessels, ships that cannot risk getting trapped in Hormuz. The quay stretches nearly 5 kilometers, with berths dedicated to crude, LNG, containers, and dry bulk. Next to the water, a refinery and petrochemical complex pump product directly into waiting hulls, while onshore storage tanks can hold over 1 million cubic meters of oil at a time. Duqm is not alone. Salalah, on Oman's southern coast, handles more than 30 million TEU of containers each year, rivaling the busiest ports in the region. Sohar, up the coast, processes over 12 million tons of bulk and petrochemical cargo annually. Each port is plugged into a growing network of pipelines and rail lines. Saudi crude can now flow directly to Duqm by pipeline, bypassing the Gulf entirely. India, China, and the UK all have equity stakes in Duqm's expansion, betting that the port's geography and capacity will become a lifeline if Hormuz is ever sealed. What looks like an isolated industrial zone is, in fact, a node in a triport system built for crisis. The hardware is already in place: deepwater berths, massive storage, and multimodal links stretching deep into Arabia. Oman's ports have quietly transformed the map, offering a way around the trap that has defined Gulf strategy for generations. In 2026, as missiles and drones turned the Strait of Hormuz into a battleground, shipping operators faced a stark choice: risk the northern corridor or shift south, where Omani pilots and patrols maintained order. Automated identification system data drawn from thousands of vessels revealed the industry's verdict. 73% of all ships transiting the strait hugged Omani waters for the southern half of their journey, steering clear of Iranian fire. Satellite heat maps from marine traffic and Maxar traced a steady, unbroken flow along the Musandam coast, while the Iranian side showed gaps and erratic detours. The real test came under attack. On March 14th, a swarm of Shahed 136 drones struck Duqm's refinery jetty. Within hours, 95% of scheduled tankers still docked, and crude offload dropped just 4%. It recovered in 2 days. 4 days later, Salalah's LPG terminal took a direct drone hit. 2 carriers paused for less than 30 minutes before resuming. Sohar's bulk berth was rocked by a rocket-guided drone on March 23rd, forcing 3 ships to anchor, but all returned to schedule by nightfall. In every case, official bulletins and AIS logs confirmed throughput losses never exceeded 5% and were erased within 48 hours. Port authorities reported Duqm averaging 1.12 million tons of crude receipts through late March, only 2% below pre-crisis levels. Salalah and Sohar showed similar resilience. Lloyd's casualty reports kept all 3 Omani ports listed as operational, even as neighboring Gulf facilities shuttered. For ship operators and port crews, the Omani corridor became the only reliable artery. The bypass was no longer theory. It was proven under fire. China's investment in Oman is not just about infrastructure. It is a lever that reaches all the way to Tehran. In 2025, the China National Petroleum Corporation extended a $1.2 billion loan to the Duqm refining and petrochemical complex, securing a 15% equity stake. This deal is tied directly to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, making Duqm a critical node in China's maritime Silk Road. The financing comes with repayment terms indexed to port throughput, giving Chinese state banks a vested interest in keeping Omani ports open and operational. For Iran, this means that any move to choke Hormuz now risks angering its largest trading partner. When Chinese oil cargoes began rerouting through Duqm, Beijing quietly warned Tehran against escalation that would threaten its investments. The result is that Omani leverage is amplified by the weight of Chinese capital, and Iran faces a new kind of pressure, not from warships, but from the world's biggest consumer and creditor. insurance markets delivered the first verdict. Within weeks of Oman's ports proving resilient, war risk premiums for tankers using the Omani corridor fell by 30 to 40%, while rates for vessels exposed to the Iranian side stayed near crisis highs. The International Energy Agency's diversion models, once predicting a 15% spike in voyage distances and a billion-dollar weekly surge in freight costs, were quietly revised downward as Duqm, Salalah, and Sohar absorbed rerouted cargoes. Coalition naval escorts, operating with Omani coordination, enabled convoys to pass through Musandam with minimal incident, while Iranian threats faded into the background. Tehran's planners, who had counted on Oman's passivity and the world's dependence on Hormuz, found their assumptions upended. The numbers tell the story: insurance discounts, a 15% diversion realized, and uninterrupted flow through Omani waters. The logic of the blockade collapsed not through confrontation, but through Oman's silent leverage, economic, geographic, and diplomatic, operating in plain sight. Today, Oman's ports and neutrality quietly redraw the map of global power. As oil flows shift and alliances recalculate, the smallest nation on the strait stands as gatekeeper. Iran's old threat fades, but the world's new choke point is defined not by force, but by Omani restraint. What do you think?